Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Girl Tried to Drown Me as a Kid by Head Assistant 6473. When I was about 9 or 10, I was invited to a classmate's birthday party at some swimming baths. All of us were the same age. It was a small class of about 20 kids, and I'm pretty sure everyone was invited. Just to clarify, I'm a boy. Anyway, I kind of got separated from everyone, and it was just me and this girl alone. I wasn't particularly close friends with her, but I did know her as she was in my class. To describe the location we were in, it was in a tunnel that connected the main wave pool to a lazy river. There wasn't really anybody else there, just me and her, when she suddenly lunged at me without warning. She grabbed my head and held it underwater. I was a pretty skinny kid, and she was bigger than me and a bit of a tomboy. About 20 seconds went by as I furiously tried to free myself, but she wasn't letting go. Fight or flight and mass panic took over, and I eventually fought my way free. I was coughing and spluttering water as I emerged, and I remember looking at her and being just in shock. I think I began to ask why she did that when she lunged at me again. She again held my head underwater for what felt like a lifetime before I fought my way free. Both times I genuinely thought I was going to drown, and she didn't let me up. I had to fight my way free. I couldn't swim at the time, but the water in the lazy river and tunnel was just maybe chest high. I began to backpedal away from her, and she was giggling as if it was funny, and she had this crazed look and grin on her face. I couldn't just climb out to escape, as it was a tunnel, so I had to try and get out of there. As I was backpedaling, she was following me, and I made sure to keep distance so she couldn't lunge again, but she was gaining on me. I actually managed to reason with her as I was so scared of her I was babbling at her. I tried to distract her by suggesting we go down a water slide together. It worked, as I could see her thinking about it, and she stopped chasing me. I managed to exit the tunnel and water, and she slowly followed me but seemed a bit unsure. I immediately felt more safe as I was out of the water and could see other people as we headed towards the slides. I kept talking all the way up about how fun the slides were, etc., but she didn't really speak at all and had a really strange look on her face the full time. Anyway, after we went down the slides, I caught up with my friends and just stuck with them, as the rest of the time I was a bit shaken up. I never told them about it, as it was embarrassing to admit a girl had tried to drown me, and I was worried I'd get teased. Anyway, fast forward to adulthood. This girl turned out to be a lesbian. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but she got with her partner who had 2 or 3 kids from her previous relationship with a guy. Turns out, they would torture the kids and eventually killed one of them. She's currently serving a life sentence in prison. I told my friends about this swimming pool incident after hearing about her crimes, and I'm pretty sure they think I'm just bullshitting, as none of them took me seriously. Maybe, as I kind of lightheartedly said, I was almost victim number 1. Nonetheless, it is a bit crazy to think back, as she obviously was a genuine psychopath, and if I'd never fought her off me to escape and then convince her to go down that slide, I genuinely believe she could have killed me. University Cult Leader by Window Guy 13. I was in my first semester of university. I had just graduated college not too long ago and had entered into a program that, after a while, I would come to resent. During that time, with adjusting and taking daily transit an hour and a half away from where I grew up into the big city in order to study, was somewhat of a new adventure to me. In a lot of ways, I was just beginning to sprout as my own individual and trying to carve a path for my life while simultaneously opening myself up to new experiences and a new environment. I have longtime friends who go to the same facility as me, but at the time, our schedules wouldn't always line up. This meant that a lot of my days were spent traveling back and forth and walking around the city alone. I really wanted to try and expand my horizon of experiences and friends during this period. In a lot of ways, I was really desiring to find a good community on campus that could help satiate my boredom and loneliness. I can be extremely extroverted, but sometimes I find that it takes a lot out of me to try and actually pursue and maintain friendships that haven't been established years prior. I've made friends before from different classes in college, but ultimately, and I know this makes me an asshole, but I would end up texting less and less until eventually either side would end up ghosting one or the other. Because I'm a busy guy, I don't find myself prioritizing people who I feel like aren't as important to me as others. I know, a shitty thing to say, but nonetheless the truth. One day, however, I met Joel. I was on the phone with my fiancée, and I distinctly remember exactly how it all went down. As I was walking out of the school's Starbucks with a decaf coffee, I had one headphone in, and I was heading to class through a small stretch of underground passageways under the street that connects the school's library building to the actual building that possesses classes. As I was hastily making my way, I saw this short and stout guy, looking roughly my age at the time, 21, with a thick brown beard and a hat on. Our eyes met, and as I was about to simply walk past, he asked me something in a very charismatic and calm tone. "Hey, sorry to bother you. You look like a pretty busy guy. But I was wondering, do you mind doing a survey about religion? It's for one of my classes." To this, I regret answering and wish I had simply continued walking. But at the time, I was becoming more and more compelled by the notion of formal religious institutions and questioning my own religious faith, particularly leaning towards Christianity. "Sure," I replied cordially. He then introduced himself as Joel, and after we went through a small survey pertaining to religious affiliations and perspectives on religions, Joel informed me that a small group of students like himself were planning on getting together as a group and discussing various religions in order to gather new insights and to create a community. Of course, with the prospect of finding some new friends on campus, and also exploring my own spiritual perspectives, I gave him my phone number after he asked for it, and he said that he would contact me in the next following days. Upon entering our first meeting, I sat down in a very crowded place with seats at our school facility and was greeted by Joel, alongside a bunch of other members. They introduced themselves to me and vice versa, and they were all extremely kind to me. We began our small group meeting, and I was a bit shocked to find out that the sole topic that we were to discuss was Christianity. I wasn't aware that we were only going to be discussing Christianity, which was against what he had proposed this group to constitute upon our meeting in the tunnel. That being said, I was still curious enough to continue, and I was accompanied by 3 other young guys of my age, who, after a bit of talking with, I found out we had a lot of similar interests. Joel, who now presented himself as a leader of our study group, relayed how we would be analyzing Christianity through a multi-step program designed to unveil the holy power associated with the religion to us. Since I was curious and wanted to learn more about the religion, as well as having made some newfound friends, I continued to attend this study group for the rest of the semester, in which there were a few circumstances where I questioned Joel's interpretations and was met with hard resistance. It felt like at times my wavering belief in what Joel was saying would be met with straight dismissal as opposed to actual conversation. I continued to brush that off as the group that I was working with got closer. The school's club, which I was now a part of, provided me with exactly what I had wanted. We even went to a church-run event together where I quit vaping, and many individuals reported mystical experiences. Things only started to get concerning with Joel during our one-on-one conversations. I discussed my personal experiences and belief in my newfound religious beliefs, and all of my former spiritual experiences as well. And Joel exposed to me a story and a few incidents that at the time I certainly should have taken as red flags. For example, when he was younger he had gone on a retreat, where when he was in prayer he said that he began to hear the voice of God talk to him. I questioned at first if he was referring to the voice of God as more of a metaphor, but he had reassured me that he literally heard God speak to him before. When he told me this, I became a bit unnerved. At the helm of this community was Joel, but in all other senses, I was satisfied with who I was and what we were doing together. Though I am not entirely dismissive of strange occurrences, especially pertaining to spirituality, His experience talking with God in his head came off as uncomfortable for me. He also said that the way he would pray would involve a direct conversation and reply with God. Out of discomfort, I wouldn't prod him on what he meant by this. This, of course, was just the beginning. After the summer had ended, I had found myself in the most religiously devoted state I had ever been in. Throughout the summer, I had had a treacherous injury which made me housebound for months, and to call upon God in a lot of ways for strength. With my newfound devotion, I was elated to fall back into the community that I had nurtured and grown with throughout the last semester relating to something that I found deep joy in. At the first lesson of the semester, something was very different. Joel, as before, was at the helm of our study session, but was now perpetually interrupted by people coming to greet him and give him praise. It was so bad that we literally essentially sat and watched for 20 minutes before we could get on with our lesson as more than 10 people, mostly young men of our age, came to greet this man. As aforementioned, when not unnerving, he was extremely charming and gave the impression that he cared deeply for everyone. Once our lesson began, he introduced us to the second phase of the program. He explained that this was one of the toughest programs of the different levels that there were, as it required even more devotion and, more importantly, an emphasis on sacrifice for those who engaged. He showed us a diagram of a small stick person, and he showed that in this program we would have to accept Jesus as the center of our life. He explained that by making our lives surround Jesus entirely, that we would not be losing something, but be gaining. He also began to go over the notion that sex before marriage is a sin, and if that we were to continue with this program, we would have to make the sacrifice of giving up sex in our relationships, and prove that we weren't. He said that many guys weren't able to continue because of it. I talked about this afterwards with one of the members of this group who, not unlike me, had been in a serious relationship with someone they loved for years. In my personal opinion, though we weren't married on the altar, I knew that both me and this other member felt devoted to our partners as if we were already married in a sense, and we both expressed how Joel's behavior surrounding this was off-putting, controlling, and intrusive. After our lesson, I was a bit dumbfounded by the intensity with which he gave his speech about this new program that we would be engaging in this semester. Joel and I sat down for a few more minutes and talked, in which I expressed experiences of devotion from the summer, and explained my entire catastrophic experience with my injury. He then went on to tell me that at times, he was actually able to know things beforehand. This seemingly random and strange statement shocked me. He said, for example, he was able to know something another member had before they had even mentioned it, and in the way that he described it, it sounded as if he was saying he had some form of mystical foresight. I was a bit jarred, to say the least, though I felt like it would be impolite to question any further. Joel then went on to tell me that he believed that, if I successfully completed this program, I was primed to become a teacher for the first program I had done the semester prior, leading others who would join, and that I had a bright future in the organization. In that moment with what he had laid down on us in the lesson, I felt overwhelmed by his expectations of me. It also became evident that Joel was not a student at our facility. In fact, he was in his mid-30s and had kids. He was actually just part of an organization that recruits people to become Christians and missionaries that works on our campus. This means that he actually lied to me when I first met him. He wasn't a student. There was no group talking about various religions, and his whole purpose was to convert me, to make me join the organization he was a part of. At this point, school began to pick up a lot, and I was also working part-time to help support myself. As I was on the train to head back home the next week, I had forgotten that my second lesson of the program that semester was supposed to happen. So I texted Joel saying, "Hey man, I actually got onto the train and forgot about our lesson. Sorry about that, dude. I'm not going to be able to make it. I also have work later." To which he replied, "Can you get off the train? Try and get here as soon as possible." I was a bit dumbfounded at this question. Since I live an hour and a half away, it wasn't as easy as getting off the train and heading back the opposite direction, and he knew that. He knew the area I live in is remote and a long distance away. I also told him that I had work which he had plainly disregarded. "No, man. Unfortunately, I can't come. Have a good lesson," I replied, to which he said again, "Come on, man. Just get off the train and come back." At this point, I was annoyed. Not only did I feel like he was commanding me, but that he was also blatantly disregarding the fact that I said no and that I had work that day. I didn't answer him. I talked with my fiancée about how I was starting to feel about the whole idea ordeal, and how I felt guilty about having feelings of wanting to distance myself from the group, while simultaneously not wanting to lose the community and friends that I had established along the way. My fiancée told me that, by the way, that Joel was acting, and with regards to the things he said, that she was starting to become uncomfortable with the whole situation. I remember sitting in bed thinking about leaving the group and how the prospect made me feel physically ill. After all, I had been given everything I wanted in a community, except that the helm was a seemingly increasingly controlling and persuasive being who was making me and possibly other members more miserable. There was an event the following Friday that was going to be at the church which was organized by the community. Originally, since many of my friends from this group were going, I intended to go. But alas, I was scheduled by my boss to work that day, so there was no way that I was going to be able to attend. I knew that Joel would be insistent upon me coming anyways, so when Joel texted me reminding me that the event was Friday, I told them that I wasn't able to go because I had work. To this he replied and simply said, "What? Bro, no way. You've got to come. Take work off and find somebody to take your shift. God wants you there." I was expected. He dismissed my decision and also said that I had to be there because God wanted me there, as if he were his mouthpiece. I went on to text him again and inform him, "No, sorry man, I can't do that. I just got a promotion and I have to be there. I hope you guys have a great time anyway." To which he then again replied similarly to what he had before. This was my personal breaking point. He knew the importance of my financial situation, and his dismissal of my personal boundaries as well as his commanding me made me decide to text him explaining that I was done with the group and that I wanted to pursue my own religious exploration without the group from then on. I felt as if he was slowly but surely increasingly controlling me and trying to take what he could, commanding me as if he were the leader of my life in any way possible. It was even up to him if I could fuck my fiancée. He replied with a long paragraph persisting in this sort of overly kind manner that I had to continue with the group, and that it was God's will for me to show up to this event even though I was completely unable to. He was certain that this group was meant for me, and that God had told him that this was where I was supposed to be. After I responded again telling him to stop, and that I would not, he sent me another paragraph of similar length repeating what he would say. No matter what I would say and whenever I would say no, he would overstep my boundaries while maintaining a kind and friendly tone in order to try and push me into submission when I clearly said no. At this point I said I didn't want him to talk to me anymore, to which he replied, "Bro, why? Can we meet up? I want you to explain why you don't want to continue, bro, so we can meet up and do that, and I can get a better sense and we can figure out what we do from there." Even in this, I knew that he was trying to elongate his chance at bringing me back into the group and continuing his reign of control. I said I didn't want to, so he asked again. I decided at that moment I needed to block him. So I did. A semester later, I was walking down the street of my school, and as I walked by a pizza parlor, lo and behold, who came out? Joel walked over to me with one of his friends, and said that I was one of his friends to his buddy. I uncomfortably stood there, and his friend went inside for a moment while Joel turned around to look at me and asked with his disarming gentleness, "Did you block me?" I replied yes. He then said, "You should unblock me. That way we can meet up and talk because I really want to know why you left the group." To which I evidently was frustrated and said, "Okay," and went on my way. That night he texted me on my Instagram insisting we meet up again, and I blocked him there too. In short, I'm thankful for my fiancée who was the love of my life. Without her, I'm not sure I would have been strong enough to have left the group in his control. The fact of the matter is that there were other guys in that group who had absolutely nobody. They had nothing, and they were prime targets for a charismatic and controlling freak. There were members of that group who were in higher levels, so to speak, who had done all the programs, who seemed as if they were emaciated. But they had become such restricted fundamentalists that their lives and their openness to new experiences were significantly thwarted. Beware of who you let into your life, and just because somebody might be nice to you does not mean that they might not have ulterior motives. Also learn to stand your ground and respect yourself. If you say no, mean it. So Joel, you controlling cult leader, let's not meet again. The Man in the Night by Benny Member 208. So for context, this happened when I was about 6, and lots of the details were taken from what my mom said about it later, but I'll try to explain it the best of my ability. One night, near Christmas, my mom, in her early 30s but looked younger, myself, 6 or 7-year-old boy, and my sister, 3 or 4-year-old girl, were walking down our street. It was not a safe street. It was known for trap houses, and there were many police raids, but we were near our house and nothing seemed off. As we were walking late at night, a man started chatting to us about our Christmas plans. Me and my sister, as young kids do, started babbling on about what we were getting from Santa and when we were seeing our family and how the house was decorated, and so on and so forth. The man, let's call him Gary, seemed particularly interested in the last part. And although my mom quickened her pace, he kept up and asked about how the house was arranged to accommodate such amazing decorations. We were about 10 doors from our house by now. He then asked a question I thought to be quite random, but my mom took it very seriously. So, is Dad home? On that night in question, he was away at a conference, which my sister very quickly informed Gary of. Entering our front garden, Gary sped very swiftly to the opening door and asked in the sickeningly sweet tone you hear from serial killers on TV, "Can I see the decorations?" My mom locked the door, which seemed to be being pushed from the guy outside, then turned the lights off and rushed us upstairs. Our bottom floor was laid out in one room, so there were no walls to block us from the pacing outside and continuous knocking. The question started from, "Can I see your decorations?" to, "Let me see them," and my mom called my dad, who rushed home from the city center. We never got bothered by Gary again, although he wasn't intercepted by our dad, if that's what you're thinking. But I dread to think of what could have happened if my amazing mom hadn't acted so fast. If this was somehow a man who just really wanted to see our decorations, my complete apologies to him. But stay safe out there. Supermarket Psycho, submitted by Dan M. This is beyond weird. I've never had anything strange happen to me in my entire life until this, and it took until my early 30s for it to happen. I grew up with an awesome family, had a great childhood, a great college experience, and good work experience. I've met tons of people over the years and never had any issues with anyone. Hell, the last fight I even got into, I was in the 2nd grade, and that guy turned out to be my best friend to this day. Anyway, I do most of the shopping and cooking for my wife and kids. I get out earlier than my wife as far as work goes, so it makes it a little easier for me to handle things. That, and I love cooking. So, as the main person in the family who shops, I have my routines down pretty well and make my rounds for a couple of different markets in my town each week. I prefer the farmers market style places, and of course the real farmers markets in the spring, summer, and fall months. But of course, like everyone else, I have to spend time in the big box supermarkets because there's just no other place to get the things that I need. This all started one day after work in the month of January of 2016. I guess I'm what everyone calls me, an old soul, and I suppose they're right. It's not a fashion statement, but, well, I guess it is. But I dress for work the way I'm most comfortable, and that includes the standard shirt and tie, but I love wearing sport coats, blazers, and suits all year round. Obviously, summer months are a little more dressed down, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. I guess I just like clothes. The way I dress in the winter for work is also a little different. My wife has tons of shoes just like any other woman, and I'm sure I'll get shit for that comment. But I have hats. I'm a hat junkie. I have every style of hat you can imagine, and about 14 fedoras. No, I'm not a hipster, and I'm not some kind of jazz junkie guy who wears them to be hip. I just wear them because I like them, and it's not necessarily an image thing. I have short-cropped hair, but don't like the look of winter hats other than fedoras. Paired with an overcoat and scarf, I guess I do look like something out of the 40s or 50s. It's just me. My grandfather dressed like this when I was a kid, and I think that somehow wore off on me as just the classy way to look to and from work. Okay, enough about that. I was at the supermarket, and it was a busy afternoon. I was buying some vegetables for a stir-fry I was making for dinner that night. And I'll always remember I was looking at baby corn when I felt someone bump into me. There was an overwhelming smell of perfume, and I turned to see this woman standing right behind me who was not looking at the produce. She was looking at me. She was in her mid-50s, I guess, and actually pretty attractive, but that's neither here nor there, as I found out she was kind of a psycho. There was no excuse me or pardon me. She just said to me, "I really like the way you look. You have an air of regalness about you." Not knowing what to say other than thank you, I just said, "Thank you." I wanted to say, you could have said that without bumping into me, but I put my manners first. She then asked me what I was making with the food I was buying, and I just said, a simple stir-fry for my family, implying that I was married and not interested in anything. I suppose that's arrogant of me to think that that's where she was going, but I would find out over time that's exactly where she was going. I excused myself and went to get some fresh chicken and to get to the checkout as I had everything that I needed. Before I got away from her, she said, "You smell really good, too." At first, I didn't think anything else of it and assumed I would just have a funny story to tell my wife when I got home. But after I got the chicken, I looked behind me, and there she was, with nothing in her hands, just following me. I gave her a little smile and a tip of my hat and walked very quickly to the self-checkout. Thank God for self-checkout. It was new to our supermarket at the time, and I knew it would save me from having to stand in a line and possibly get stuck near her again. I got all my stuff, got it into a bag, and made my way out into the parking lot. I chuckled to myself again, got in my car, and I had used the remote starter so I could just get out of there if I needed to quickly. I looked down at my cell phone for a second to see if my wife had texted me any last-minute requests, and hoping I wouldn't have to go back in the store. That's when there was a tap at my window. I looked up, and there she was, standing outside my door. Even after I looked at her and acknowledged her presence, she kept tapping the window with her leather-gloved hand, and I thought, oh, great. Then I rolled down the window thinking maybe I had left something back in the store or whatever. I asked her what I could do for her, and she asked if there was any way I could give her my number and maybe meet up for a drink. I had already taken my gloves off and raised my left hand with my ring finger displayed perfectly for her, and I said, "No, thank you, I'm happily married." She just said, "I was once married too." And then she walked away. Okay, no big deal. I drove home. I told my wife and we got a laugh out of it. I mean, I'm not some Brad Pitt stud, so I thought the whole thing pretty funny, and my wife did too. She's had similar stories from weirdos saying things at her at the store or mall, just like mine. Life went on, and I continued the way that I normally shop, and I didn't give her one second thought. The crazy woman, that is, not my wife. The second time this woman ran into me, I thought it was a little strange. It was at a completely different market in a completely different town. I mean, another place that I did shop at least once a week. But I thought it was a strange coincidence that she would be there as well at the same time I was. This time she saw me and waved to me, and my stomach churned a little bit. For her age and the weather, she was not dressed very appropriately. She had on an incredibly short skirt with high-heeled shoes not designed for snowy weather. She walked quickly over to me and said, "Hello, nice to see you again." I just kind of said, sure, and kept moving to get my things that I needed. She followed me and said, "Are you sure you don't want to meet for a little drink?" I said, "No, thank you, but it's much appreciated, and I'm very flattered." She walked behind me again, and before walking away, whispered in my ear, I can do things to you that you've only dreamed of that you'd be afraid to ask your wife to do." And she walked away. Okay, that's great. This story I don't think I'm going to tell my wife, I thought. But hopefully the lady gets the message that I'm not interested. I didn't see her again for a couple of weeks, but the next time I did, I had my baby daughter with me. I was only running into the supermarket for a couple of things, so I kept my daughter in her carrier and just walked along with her. Just as I was getting to the self-checkout, here comes this woman again, Cougar of the Year. I had a blanket covering up the carrier, and this woman literally reaches by me and pulls the blanket down and says, "Oh, what a cute baby, she's gorgeous." That's where I drew the line. I pulled the blanket back up over the carrier to keep my baby warm and said to the woman, "I'd appreciate it if you'd stop talking to me and never, ever touch my child or even attempt to again." I meant it, and she understood. But that didn't stop her from saying, "Ooh, a fiery attitude too, huh?" I just turned away, checked out my stuff, and got the hell out of there. I got home and told my wife the story when she got home from work, and she could tell that I was pretty pissed off that a stranger had almost touched my child. I'm a very protective daddy. My wife is a very protective mommy. You just don't do something like that with someone's baby. And for all you touchy-feely people out there possibly listening to this, parents don't like that. Don't ever do it. That night after I was doing the dishes and got the kitchen clean, my wife had the kids upstairs taking their baths and was getting them into bed. I ran up to give my kisses and goodnights when I heard something out on our front lawn. It sounded like tires whirling in ice and snow. It had been snowing that afternoon, so I thought maybe one of my neighbors got stuck. I looked out the window of my son's bedroom, and it wasn't a neighbor. It was a strange vehicle, a really nice BMW to be exact, that was stuck in my driveway. I told my wife I was going downstairs to give someone a hand who was stuck in our driveway, figuring it was just somebody trying to make a turn and got caught up in the snowbank on either side of my driveway. I threw on a parka and, of course, a hat, not thinking that it was a fedora instead of a true winter toque like I would wear to go out and clear the snow. I walked down my driveway to the vehicle, and to my surprise, or maybe not surprise, but definitely dismay, there was the Cougar sitting in the driver's seat. She had followed me home. I walked to the driver's side and got the shock of my life. She was wearing a fur coat open all the way down the front and nothing else except high heels. She rolled down the window and I could immediately smell booze, and I told her before she could even speak that it was best she leave right now and I would help push her out. I think I also said something about not calling the cops, but she'd better get out of the neighborhood before I did. She called me by my name, which is really messed up because I never even told her my name. And she said all that she wanted to do was S and F. She wasn't taking no for an answer. She tried to get out of the vehicle and I held the door so she couldn't, but unfortunately I slipped on some ice onto my ass into the snowbank on the side of my driveway. She immediately got out and jumped on top of me and started humping away and trying to kiss me. I pushed her off of me and looked up at my porch and saw my wife standing there, and I yelled for her to call the cops. She screamed, "Are you okay?" And I just screamed out like an idiot, "Supermarket psycho!" We laugh about that now, but at the time I was worried that I was going to have to punch this woman in the face to get her off of me. Also amazing is that I'm a pretty articulate guy, and all I got out was "supermarket psycho." What a moron. I managed to wrangle her into the snow and get up and saw my wife on the porch again with her cell phone. The woman tried to jump at me again and said, "I don't understand why you're not going with me. Get in. I'll take you home." I kept backing up and telling her that the police were on their way and she best get in her car. She stood there for a second looking at me and said, "I'll be back. I know what I want, and when I want what I want, I get it." She got into her car, which was still stuck, and sat there spinning the wheels of her BMW. The cops showed up in less than 5 minutes and got out and immediately assessed the situation. They talked with me, talked to my wife, and obviously talked to this woman who was more than 3 sheets to the wind. Throughout all of it, I told one of the cops about her finding me at the supermarket and a couple of weeks of her strange attraction to me. He just smiled and said, "Well, you are a little overdressed for the evening, aren't you?" I laughed at that and said, yeah, I guess so. They got her out of the car, made her do all the field sobriety tests, which she failed, and then she refused a breathalyzer, so they took her into custody. They told me that a tow truck would be on its way to get her car as it was going to be impounded. Of course, now all my neighbors were out watching all of this and coming over to talk to me, wondering what the hell was going on. I let them know what had happened, and everyone got a chuckle out of it, and the tow truck finally showed up, and I thought everything was over. Later that night, as my wife and I were sitting enjoying a brandy in front of our fire talking about our little escapade that night, my cell phone rang. I didn't recognize the number and for whatever reason picked it up. And it was the woman. She said she was calling me from jail and needed me to post her bail. Again, I had no idea how she knew my phone number. I couldn't figure any of this stuff out, and I never got a chance to ask her because I just hung up. I called the police station, told them what had just happened, and they assured me that it wouldn't happen again. And it didn't. Nothing ever came of any of this. I never heard from the woman again and never saw her again. She's out of my life, and for that I'm very grateful. My wife said it was the way I dressed that caused all this attention and said I should stop. I don't think it had anything to do with that. I think she was just a psycho. I should also add something that I did leave out. When the police got her out of her vehicle and went through it, they found a half-empty bottle of bourbon, furry handcuffs, and duct tape. Sounds like she had a pretty wild party in mind, a party of which I'm glad I was never a part of. How she knew my name, where I lived, and my phone number is still a mystery. I figure she just followed me home so she knew where I lived, and maybe it was just a Google internet search that figured out all the rest. At any rate, all this goes to show you is that there are psychos out there at every turn. I'm very happy that I've never seen her again, as if she knew where I lived and had my phone number, my family could be in danger of something happening. We moved after COVID, last year in fact, so even if I do bump into her again, I know to be on my guard to make sure she doesn't follow me, and will never bother me and my family again. Lots of freaks out there, everybody. Be safe. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature you'd like to hear narrated on my podcast or channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. After this one, man, I feel so much better about my area because I see weirdos every single day. They're all around us. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Make sure you hit the notification button for every time I upload. And of course, if you'd like to take your support a step further, find me on Patreon. Links to that and my social media are in the description below. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.